Alright, welcome everybody to developing applications with Python. We're going to start with lesson 1 being a fairly simple but fun project to build. We're going to do just like a login page or a login screen for an application, just kind of to get our foot in the door, get introduced to these new topics and these new ideas. This isn't a very beginner level, like bottom-based tutorial, so you need to have some understanding of Python or some understanding of programming and how it works, as well as how to utilize an IDLE. If you don't know what an IDLE is, a good place to start is an introduction to programming or Python coding, something along those lines. But this isn't a base tutorial like that. We're going to go through a little bit more intermediate topics and ideas. And so with the project we're going to be building today, we're going to do a modernized login screen for a desktop application. So rather than building a full-scale project from the beginning, we're just going to get used to seeing these modules and these functions that we're going to be using, I guess. So before I start, I do just want to jump in and pull up this whiteboard I wrote up in really quickly. And let me just move this so that you can kind of see it, the whole thing. I guess I can zoom out a little bit. Alright, so when we're working on building a full-scale application, there are a couple things that can go into it. We're going to have different classes that will handle different functions, objects, whatever. We're going to have a database that's going to store any data that we need to keep held for the application. And then we're going to have a GUI or graphical user interface that's going to display what's happening within the application. So, as I said, our class is going to handle our functions, handle any of the logic side of things, and our class will actually talk to our database. It'll send and receive information from our database, and so same thing vice versa. With the database, we'll send and receive information from the classes within our project, and the database will hold encrypted data that we can call upon based off of whatever is happening at the given moment within our application. And then the GUI is going to be talking to both these things and receiving information as to what to be displaying on the screen at any given point in time within our project. So there's three things you kind of have to have a base understanding of, that being classes and object-oriented programming, databases and working with data structure like that, and then building graphical user interfaces. And we're going to go over all those things today, but if you have a base understanding of classes or a base understanding of databases, it's going to help make this a lot easier for you to understand as we're going along. So we're going to start with a new empty project, and I'm using PyCharm in my case as my IDLE. And there's a couple modules I'm going to be using to help me build this, and you may want to use the same ones, you may want to use similar ones. They don't have to be the exact same, but if you're following this step by step, I would recommend using the same libraries or same imports. And we're going to start this off by importing our libraries or our modules, and so I like to just kind of comment things out as I can, just to separate where things are within the code, make it a little more readable when I come back to it and change things or add things later. So my imports, and we're going to import, so from Tkinter, we're going to import message, from Tkinter, import message box, and then from Tkinter, we're going to import everything. And then from custom Tkinter, we're going to import everything. So these are our graphical user interface, or GUI libraries. These are the things we're going to be using to build out our application. the graphical side of it anyway. And then for our database, we're going to be using Sqlite 3. And I believe that's all we need as far as our libraries. And so whenever I start a new project or a new application like this, I like to start with the database. That way, if I ever need to add anything or do anything, I don't have to go back up and create the database later to manipulate those things. I can do all the testing from the start. And when you create a new database in Sqlite 3, you need to create a connection to a database or a database file. So I'm just going to call this con. I'm going to say Sqlite 3.connect, and then just name it whatever you like. I'm going to call this login.db, and it has to end with .db.database for it to recognize it being a database file, obviously. And then we need to claim a cursor, and I'm going to set this to a variable called c. And this is going to be our con.cursor, and our cursor is kind of how we point at different things in the database, or add things to the database, delete things from the database. That's all going to be done from our cursor. And I'm just going to comment this out. Database initialization, and then we're going to do account table. And so when you create different tables in the database, you're creating different, it's very similar to creating spreadsheet or similar things to that nature. You're creating tables of information and data that are going to be related some way, but not all the same, rather than storing it in something like a list. So we're going to say cursor.execute, and you put these 3 quotation marks. I'm not entirely going to jump into why that is, but it's what SQLite asks. So we're going to say creates table if not, we're going to say if not exists. That way we're not creating multiple tables every time we run the application, every time the application is opened. So create table if not exists, and we're going to say account, and I'm going to open this up, and in here there's different kinds of data types we can use, same with Python, similar to Python. And so we only really need 2 arguments for an account. We're going to need a username, and that's going to be a text. Text is similar or same thing to having a string in Python. And then we're going to put a comma, and we're going to have a password, and this is going to be a text as well. You could set your password to an integer and then just have it be a series of numbers, but I like to do it as a text. It just makes it easier to work with. Then we're going to say connection dot commit, and this is how you save your database within your project. And I'm just going to quickly close this up so we have a little more room to see. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start with the application class, and this is going to be the biggest part of logic to build out, because it's going to handle both the logic and the functions of the application, as well as handle the GUI setup of the application. And so we're going to come down here and say class app, and we define an initialization for this app. And right now there's not really anything we need to do to initialize this, so I'm just going to say pass for now. And there's a couple different functions we're going to need to create within this class. We're going to need to create a function that will check the database for a user and check if the password entered in the application matches the password that's stored in the database related to that person's username, if that makes any sense. So I'm just going to call this check login. And from here we're going to say pass. We're just going to write these all out. We're going to define our GUI. pass. And I kind of think that's all we need for now as far as setting up the class goes. So I'm going to jump right into setting up the GUI of it all. So we're going to be using Tkinter and custom Tkinter to create a modern looking type of login, application, and GUI. So we're going to start by saying, I'm just going to call mine root equals CTK, root.title, and we're going to call this login, root.geometry, if I could spell. And we're going to set this something small, like 300 by 150 maybe. I'm going to call a title, and we're going to call this custom CTK label. And if you want a more in-depth understanding of how Tkinter and all these GUI applications work, I'm going to be working on a full tutorial where I break down every function and break down all the different things that you can do with Tkinter. But for this, I'm assuming you have somewhat of a knowledge as to how to build these types of things. And I'm just going to show you how you can interconnect them all and have a finished project. So I'm not really going to go into why we say, why we declare root, why we declare Tkinter, why we're calling this CTK label, or why we're going to enter the things we enter. We're going to put it on the root, or the root screen, and then we're going to say text is equal to, and we're just going to set this to login, and we're going to say font equals how do we do this again? Arial 24, just because I want this one to be a little larger. And we're going to say title.pack. And then label is going to be a CTK label. It's going to be root. Text is going to be username. Font is going to be Arial 12. Label.pack that one. We're going to need a username entry equals entry. Actually equals CTK entry. Put that on the root. Set the width to 20. Actually, I'm not going to set a width. I'm just going to leave it. We're going to set a border width of 2 and a corner radius of 4. Username entry dot pack, and what the border width and corner radius are going to do is they're just going to set how thick the border box around the entry, the text entry label is, how thick it is, and then corner radius is going to change the radius of the corner, so set it from being a 90-degree square to becoming a circular type shape. And then we're going to say label 1 is CTK label, put it on the root, text is going to be password, font is going to be Arial 12, label 1.pack, and then password entry is going to be entry. It's actually going to be a CTK entry. Roots. Show, I'm going to set to stars. Border width, it's also going to be 2. Corner radius is going to be 4. Password entry.pack. And then finally we need a button to log in, so we're going to call this login button equals button. It's actually going to be a CTK button on the root with a text of log in one more time. And then we're going to say border width 3, 2, corner radius 4, background we're going to set to light gray, and then hover color is we're going to set this to green, and then login button.pack. And now we're going to come here and say command is going to be equal to self.checkLogin. So this should be it for the GUI sense of it all. Not too complicated. About 16 lines of code max, probably. It's fairly simple. Now the check login, what this is going to do is it's going to grab what the user put for the username, and it's going to check the database to see if any of those usernames exist. Then it's going to compare what the person or the user entered as a password, and it's going to compare that to the password associated with the username called on from the database. And it's going to check to see if those things match up. And if they do, it's going to do one thing, and if they don't, it's going to do another thing. So let's start doing that. We're going to say user, and I actually need to probably define this underneath of GUI, I guess would probably be the better option here. And we're just gonna say user, and I actually need to make these globals. So username entry and password entry, so that these can be called on over here. Username entry dot get, password entry dot get, user is going to be that, password is going to be that, and then we're going to say c.execute select password from accounts. So select the password data from the accounts table where username equals dot username. And then we're going to set our dictionary where username is equal to user. And then we're going to say password is equal to c.fetch 1 string password. Didn't mean to write string password. And sometimes when you're taking things out of an SQL database, it will return it as a string, or not as a string, sorry, a list. And so when you convert it to a string, you need to remove those list items. And so we're going to say dot strip and we're just going to strip the things that would make it a list. And we're going to say we're actually just going to, I'm going to print the password and print the password attempt. And then we're going to say if password equals the password, Tkinter root dot message box dot show info login status. I'm going to say login was successful. If I could spell, we're just going to do that. And then else message box dot show info login status login failed, try again. Okay, so now when we click the button inside of our GUI, it's going to automatically load this function. It's going to check and see if if the user exists in the database, and if it does, then it's going to check if the password that the user entered matches with the password that the database found or returned. If they match, it's going to show login, and if they don't match, then it's going to say login failed, try again. And there's one more thing I need to do down here, root.main loop, because I always forget. Now we're going to say app is equal to app. We're going to say c.execute, because we need to have an account to test it with. And we're going to say insert into accounts values. We're going to say dot user name and dot password. Username is going to be, let's just say test user for now, and password is going to be test123. Con.commit app.gui. And now, if we run this should open up a Tkinter window. And I have no idea what it's going to look like when it runs, or if it's going to want to run. Something didn't go right. Background not supported. What was background issue? Rights. For some reason, there isn't a background function on custom Tkinter. There is on Tkinter, so sometimes I forget to get rid of that. And I believe that this time it worked. Yes, it did. So when everything's said and done, you end up with something that looks kind of like this. And I would probably put a Y pad on the button, because these things are spaced out pretty nicely, but this button isn't. So now we have a graphical user interface that we can interact with, and it's going to have a working function of checking the user's information. So if we just write any username, and actually I'm going to write the main one, the actual one first, just to see if we did all of this correctly with the database. So what did we say? Test user, and then test123. Login failed, try it again. Okay, yeah, see, so this took this, and it didn't switch it. So what happened here? It's not stripping these. Okay, what if we get rid of this? And if equals password 0. Let me try it this way really fast. Sometimes this happens and the strip command doesn't remove it all the time for whatever reason that may be. Or I might have written it wrong, and that's very, very, very plausible as well. So we're going to say test user, test123. There we go. So login was successful that time, but if we put test, login failed, please try again. Now you could go a step further, and we could create a create account function where if the application recognizes that there is already an account on this computer, on this device, it'll automatically load up the login page, And if it's the application's first time being run, it'll bring the user to a registration page, or a registration screen, I guess. So it's fairly simple. It's not anything crazy, but it's a good starting place. If you can build a Tkinter application this way and have it interact with a database, have multiple different functions that are working and are being called from within different events within the application page, this is just a good starting spot to understand and to get some motivation as to what to work your next project around. You can expand on this more. You can create multiple logins. You can create a function to create a login, a function to delete logins, a function that opens up a new page if you're a new user, and if you're a previous user, it brings you right to the main application. These are all possibilities you can do with this. I'm just using this episode 1 to bring an introduction to database manipulation and working with Tkinter GUI to build full stack applications. If you look at this one more time, it includes animations. It supports these things. It includes customized graphics, very similar to web development with HTML and CSS. We get our main body and our functionality, and then we get our actual graphic user interface, what the person is going to see on the front end of things. Obviously this could be made to look a little nicer, look a little cleaner. I just wrote this up quick so that you guys could get an understanding of how you do this, how you go about working with these things, and why how we go about building an application when we're starting. So again, very, very, very simple, minimalistic thing to build. Just a login page, and if you use the wrong capitalization for the right, we can log in, and so this is going to give us none because that user doesn't exist. And why is that not working now? There we are. So it's going to check, and we could even create a workaround for that, where instead of giving us an error, it creates a new message, a new Tkinter message box that says something along the lines of that user doesn't exist, or no one with that name was found, something like that. Many different possibilities, many ways to scale this project, many ways to advance on this project. So again, it's very simple, very minimalistic, but it's a great stepping stone for understanding application building. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. I hope it was helpful. I hope it made sense. I'm gonna get a little more in depth and do tutorials just on Tkinter, tutorials just on Sqlite. I'm probably going to do a Python tutorial series at some point, but they've been done so many times that anybody can find them anywhere else. It's just a matter of if you find somebody you enjoy watching. So yeah, I figured this was a good starting spot for everybody, and I encourage you to add on and change things, create new things, use this as a stepping point, and send me your applications that you're currently working on, because I would love to see what some of you people are building, some of the things that you're doing with this type of work, some of the ideas that you guys have, because maybe you're looking at it from another angle that I haven't seen yet, or you're building things a little bit more cleanly. Not that this isn't clean, but there definitely is cleaner ways to go about building these things. But yeah, again, I hope you really did enjoy the video. I hope it was helpful in any way, shape, or form. And if you could, just leave a like and maybe subscribe if you're looking at coming back for any more tutorials in the future. And they should be coming not too long from now. I'm going to try and upload 1 or 2 a day. That way there's always content to be watched. So yeah, thank you guys. I'll see you later.